Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is a Mateusz Sulowski blade. I'm massacring the name. Apologies for that up front. But before I get into the video, I do want to give some disclaimers and caveats here. One, this is graciously on loan from sword friend Andrew. Special tip of my hat and thanks to him for sending this my way, being patient with me while I review it and take my time to get through it and gather my thoughts and make this video, etc., etc. So special thanks to him for sending this my way. Do know that sword friend Andrew would like his sword back, and he's given me the okay to cut with it, to share it with you, but he would like it back in one piece, and ideally still in a good piece. So I'm not going to abuse this sword. I'm going to cut water bottles, pool noodles, some light targets with it. That's as far as I'm going to take it in this video before I send it back to sword friend Andrew in good condition. The other bit that you should know, it'll be obvious, I don't study historic European martial arts. I don't fancy myself an expert in this subject, but I do know how to operate a camera and blab into a microphone, so hopefully the thoughts and musings that I have are useful to you if you're thinking about buying a sword from Mateusz Sulowski, or if you find one secondhand, which I believe this one happened to be, or if you want to commission a work from him, or if you're inspired by it, whatever. Hopefully the video is useful. The aim here actually is going to be to show you some close-ups of the bits and bobs, fits and features, move it around, use it, talk about that experience, give you what thoughts I can, but hopefully at that point you have an understanding if it's worth your money or not. I'll give you my thoughts at the end though. Now, before I go into the rest of the review, I do want to note this is a $3,000 sword, and that is not an insubstantial amount of money, but it is also not a lot of money for the tier of product that this is. So bear in mind that this is a handmade, one-of-a-kind-ish kind of product. He's made a few other swords that are like this, Type 14 or 16. That's how Mateusz Sulowski advertises them on his website. It is not necessarily super unique, but it is a one-of-a-kind type object that is made by a competent person who has invested a lot of time and energy into their craft. And you get a lot. You get a kind of, obviously, it's a beautiful scabbard handle, an interesting blade that you don't see everywhere. It takes some time to make and is really well crafted, which you will see later. So bear in mind, $3,000 is a substantial amount of money. However, it's not $10,000 or $50,000, nor is it $300, but this is about the same price as some of the museum line pieces from Albion that come with no scabbard, or maybe 3 Albions or something like that. It's not a ludicrous amount of money for the tier of product that it happens to be in. And I do have to bear that in mind. I'm not expecting it to, I'm not going to give the same leeway I would a $300 sword or a $1,000 sword, but I can't hold it to the same standard as a $50,000 sword or a $10,000 or something like that. So bear that in mind as you're hearing the rest of the babbles in this video, that this is a relatively expensive sword. $3,000 is the price for the package. Now I'm going to go on with the bits and bobs and fits and features, and I'm going to start with the pommel, the end cap right here. So what we have here is an octagonal pommel that is faceted. It is a kind of derivative of a wheel pommel, at least it feels that way, which means it's not necessarily to my personal preference. I don't happen to like wheel pommels. They don't rest in my hand particularly well, and they often kind of feel aggressive on the flub of my hands as I grip the sword. So I understand that they're historic, they're the way the swords are shaped. I just don't like the way they feel. I tend to prefer fishtail pommels, scent stopper pommels, that kind of thing. Now, this pommel is a faceted octagonal pommel with a large peen block that rests on one of the facets, and I think aesthetically it's really lovely and executed really quite well as well. As a handmade object, this is reasonably precise. I would have thought it was milled out or done differently, but as I understand it, Mateusz Sulowski is kind of hand grinding these bevels in, and they're pretty even and crisp and clean, and aesthetically it's a lovely looking piece. I also like how the peen block is large, covers up one of those facets. It looks intentional, looks like he deliberately designed it this way, and I appreciate the intent and execution on the pommel. I don't happen to really like the way it fits in my hand, unfortunately. So as I hold it, it's not terribly uncomfortable. It doesn't have sharp edges or anything like that bump into it. It's more a me problem. I'm just not a big fan of wheel pommels. If you are, this is probably going to feel fine in your hand. If you don't like wheel pommels, then just because it's not technically one, don't expect it to feel better. Now that said, the execution on it is really quite nice. As I look at the peen block as well, or as I look at the peen itself, it's rounded over. It looks really clean and nice. There's not kind of misplaced hammer marks or ugliness at all. It looks a little bit like jewelry. There's a lot of intent here on the smaller details of things, and I really appreciate that here. It's kind of what you'd expect to get in a sword in this price bracket, and I'm happy to see it on just about every little nook and cranny in the sword. There are elements of it being handmade. If you look closely, you will see that there is asymmetry, but if you also look closely, you're seeing a lot of effort to make things clean and nice here, and it's appreciated. Moving up to the grip, there's quite a lot to talk about here. So first, the transitions between the grip and the pommel and the grip and the guard. There's no schmutz, yucky bits, anything like that. All very clean and well attended to. The grip also just has an interesting shape. So it's elliptical, it has dimension in just about every direction that you look at it. It swells, it thins, it widens, it tapers. It's more cylindrical down by the pommel. It's more elliptical up by the crossguard. And if you hold it in one hand, it feels really locked in one hand. And if you grab it with two hands, it's easy to rotate and be maneuverable, which I think really suits this sword exceptionally well. This sword is like a big, chunky, imposing looking sword, but balanced really well by just the dynamics. I'll talk about them later, but the way that you hold it in one hand is, well, it's maneuverable, and you feel great in that position. When you put two hands in, it feels almost like a toy or a twig in your hand. And in a good way, it feels just very light and effortless to move around. And that nimbleness is really complemented by this style of handle, and moving it around, twisting it in your hand, it feels great. It's an excellent choice for the style of handle. I'm also kind of just interested in how it's laid out. It has a seam along the back, which is an interesting take since it seems that it's been wound in cord and done deliberately. That seam is a choice, I would imagine. At the same time, it doesn't feel bad. I can't pick at it. Nothing comes loose. It's very, very well executed. I'm not a big fan of a seam. At the same time, I kind of like that there is a feeling in my hand and I can tell which edge I'm on. So if there's an edge that I know is sharper, one that is duller, if I'm going to hit armor, maybe one edge is duller, one edge is very, very sharp. I would be able to feel that without having to look at the sword. And it can be kind of hard to tell on these swords that are symmetrical which edge is which, and that seam along the leather gives you a clear feeling in your hand about which side of the sword you're holding. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it is also very well stitched, very well executed. All of the seams are very even, and bear in mind that this is kind of tricky to do because the surface isn't even, it's not the same shape, but that seam runs very parallel. It's really well done leather work here, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into making it neat and tidy. There's also rims or raised riser bits on here that I think accent the overall flow really well. And obviously there are these panels on here done in red that match the scabbard work that are just incredibly detailed and lovely. I'm a little bit nervous about the longevity of these kind of things. Now, I haven't handled the sword a whole lot, but I have obviously done, and it doesn't wear off. It doesn't appear to show any signs of handling from what little I've done. However, these do feel solid, but I wonder how they will age because there's risen parts and there's very fancy little work here. So I would imagine that this will degrade quicker than the rest of the handle. I can't be sure about that, but it feels like if I were to wear a ring or a gauntlet or something like that, that design would be chewed up pretty quickly. It is nevertheless exceptional looking, and I really love the look of it. I'm a big fan of how this came out. I like the kind of tactile feeling it gives me in the hand. I like how it rests in the belt as an art piece. It's really quite exceptional looking. As I move up to the crossguard, well, this has some depth and dimension to it, and it reminds me, well, it's inspired by some of my favorite work. So this sword was noted as inspired by the Vorpal sword by Peter Johnson, as well as some other larger swords that are referenced in the material from Oakeshot's books and some museum examples. It reminds me of like the Sword in the Stone. It's based on some of my favorite works, and so I really happen to just love the overall look. It again has faceted, octagonal, but slightly different octagonal bits on it. It tapers and swells out. It has grooves and recesses in it, and I think it's simple, elegant, and absolutely to die for lovely. Now, the grip, as I look at it again, it lines up well. There's no hot spots or anything like that if my hand gets close to it. And the gap in the crossguard is also reasonably well done. It's not perfect. There's not, there are some gaps around it slightly, but generally speaking, it's really well executed. And for a custom-made sword, this is kind of nitpicky stuff to go into. It's not as clean as some of the Albions I've seen out there, but it is much cleaner than a number of other custom works and historical pieces that I've seen, and I would call it overall quite good, and I'd be happy with it if I were to pay $3,000 for it. So it is attended to. But that is the thought, I guess, on the crossguard, and the overall look of the hilt, though, is something that I'd kind of talk a little bit about. Now, this goes into some of the scabbard as well. There are elaborate patterns on the scabbard, but the hilt itself, I love the pieces. I just don't know that I love them together. So the faceted pommel, excellent. The crossguard, excellent. The grip, excellent work. However, there's kind of like a stark simpleness in the pommel, different and well designed, but there's no grooves or anything like that. So I don't feel like it matches the crossguard particularly well. And if there were some grooves or something kind of cut in, I think it would tie the crossguard and pommel together better. Their floral patterns and stuff like that also make me feel like there should be engravings or some additional metal work or etching or something like that to give this more organic floral pattern in the fitting. So this is more of a me subjective take. I think the pieces are all exceptionally well done, and at a distance it looks really good, but up close I find that they just are at odds with one another visually a little bit to me. My eye kind of tends to pop to one piece then the other, and it doesn't really want to take it all in as one object. It's a purely subjective visual take, though. I wish there were more or less, I would like to see like more engraving or something like that on the handle, or a simpler grip and less ornate work on here, something that tied it together. But that might just be my modern brain and aesthetic working. It's still absolutely lovely. If you happen to love the combination, I can't blame you. It is a handsome pairing. I'm going to move on to the scabbard now, and the first thing I'm going to address is the aesthetics of the scabbard. It has absolutely intricate, beautiful leather work. It matches the panel or the grip leather work as well, and it's beautiful to look at. It makes a really compelling looking piece, and it's different. You don't see this kind of work all the time, and it's exceptionally well done. I really like the look of it. It feels like substantial, good quality leather. If I look on the back, it doesn't have the same pattern on the back, but it does have a seam that runs down that's been stitched. I like that it's been stitched and not just rolled over. The stitching, again, is very, very even. The scabbard's been banged around a little bit. It's overall well cared for, but the leather is holding up quite well. And while you can find little human elements, little flaws in some of the design work here, overall, I think it's really, really well done. Nothing pulls my eye as a glaring flaw or anything like that. What does pull my eye, though, is some of the aesthetic choices made. So there's a bronze chape at the end. I've given my feelings about the hilt. And together, again, it's just a piece that seems out of place. The style of the chape doesn't seem to match particularly well with the hilt components or the furniture there. The panels on the scabbard and grip look really excellent together, but the rest of the pieces just seem not to fit. These are very pedantic, small, subjective things I want to point out, but to me, visually, it just it pulls apart things. I start looking at the hilt or the design on the scabbard and the grip first, and then I look at the hilt components separate, and then I see the chape, and it just doesn't kind of blend together to my eye as well as I might like it to. At the same time, again, it is quite handsome and quite well done. Just if you're a sword nerd and you're really staring at a long time, really wondering if it's worth your $3,000, those are some of the things that kind of start to stand out to me over time. Now, I digress. The scabbard is still exceptionally well made. It doesn't rattle. It is made of quality leather. It's been designed quite well. On the mouth of the scabbard has also been covered with leather. Sometimes this is a step that's not done. I love the additional attention to detail here. It covers up, lets you not see how the sausage is made underneath. It has an excellent presentation, a beautiful face at every angle that you look. It also comes with a belt, which is made for a few different sizes, I guess, but it's been adorned with different pieces of brass jewelry on it, and it looks exceptional. It looks pretty from every angle. The quality seems quite good, and it is exceptionally well made. And I like that it also comes with the scabbard and is a really, really nice scabbard. So if I compare other $3,000 swords, quite often they do not come with a scabbard, and it is an additional fee. This scabbard comes with this sword comes with an exceptionally well-made scabbard, and it ties the package together quite well overall in my mind. Now I'm going to talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, and it's defined as a type 14 or 16 blade on Mateusz's website. I'm not sure exactly where this would fall in. At the same time, it basically has a large fuller that runs about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way up the blade, and the blade is a very wide triangular shape that has a bunch of profile taper as it runs down. It also has distal taper. Those measurements are provided in the description down below if you're interested. It's on the thinner side in terms of thickness, but it has a lot of profile taper. That's where it gets its rigidity from, but it also has a reasonable amount of flex to it. So I'll note, though, that I love the aesthetics of the blade, and this seems to be based on swords that are historical as well as fanciful. I really absolutely love the Peter Johnson Warple sword. It's one of my favorite looking swords of all time, and this is based on that. No wonder why it's candy to my eye. But I digress. There are some things I'd like to point out here. One, the lines and grinding are really quite clean. The polish, while it's a satin polish, looks aesthetically just somehow cleaner than I'm often used to seeing. And the fuller transitions are really quite crisp, which is something that I personally like. I kind of am bothered by when fullers just kind of peter off. While it's historic, I like to see a termination done. And this is a really challenging balance, and where I give a special tip of my hat to Mateusz Sulowski. Quite often my eye prefers the Japanese aesthetic, which when done correctly, or done in the way I like, I guess I should say, is really quite crisp. The lines are sharp and clean and precise. And when I see that done on European swords, it kind of hits the uncanny valley territory. It just looks off when it looks super precise and machine made. And so balancing that aesthetic is tough. Here, I can look and I can find imperfections. I can find the human element of it. At the same time, there's a lot of effort done to cleanliness and precision. And I think the balance is absolutely excellent here. It looks pristine and precise, but when you look up close, you can obviously find little areas that wander, little imperfections, some slight deviation from perfect symmetry. At the same time, you really have to look for it. And I think it's absolutely excellently done. There's attention to detail here, things that must have taken a fair amount of time. But the delivery is in this, I don't know, this work of art that balances human and precision quite well, at least in my mind and to my eye. The grind lines are also really clean. There's one single bevel. I don't notice a giant secondary bevel or anything, which is also quite common. And it tapers down quite well. It's relatively even. Again, dimensions and all that kind of stuff and weapon dynamics, computer stuff is in the description down below, which I suppose could bring me to the dynamic portion of the blade. So dynamics, I've put them in the description down below. This feels different than it looks. It looks like this big, giant, imposing sword that's going to be maybe brutish to move around, but it is anything but that. You pick it up and it instantly feels very lively for such a substantial sword in your hand. You can very comfortably wield this one-handed, or at least I can. Now, I'm not a small guy, but I think just the way it moves and the overall weight of it isn't uncommon for a single-handed sword, and I feel like I can maintain point control. I can get the edge where I want it to be. I can start it and stop it reasonably well. It's not a dainty, light thing, but it is more maneuverable in the hand than you would expect it to be. And then when you put two hands in, it almost feels like a toy in a good way, but it all of a sudden feels like really nothing's there and you could easily move it around. Now, it's not as long as some two-handed swords should be, or could be, I guess I should say, but at the same time, I feel like I have a reasonable amount of reach and I feel in full control when I have two hands on the sword and like I can be very, very agile and dexterous with it. So maneuvering it is just very surprising. Picking it up, this is a sword that just makes you smile when you pick it up, which is wonderful, because when you see swords like this that are really elaborate and well-made and expensive, sometimes you pick them up and it feels like somebody didn't know how to make a sword. You pick it up and they're like, oh, you have no command of dynamics or have no idea how sword should feel because it feels like dead weight. And that's just not what this sword feels like. It feels like Mateusz Sulowski has a pretty strong idea of what feels like good in your hand and is able to deliver it with his craft. Now, I will point out that dynamically the nodes feel in odd places. So it's a little lower than I might like on the blade. That's not uncommon for some wider style blades, but the hilt node is also in an odd place. And I get the feeling that if I were to strike on hard things with this sword, I would feel a lot of vibration in my hand. It's usually a little closer to the crossguard where you might hold with kind of your top two fingers. In this case, it's almost in the middle of my palm, and that means it's going to wiggle around a little bit in my hand. I'm going to feel the shock a little bit more on harder swords. The blade does lock into my hand pretty well. I feel like I have good purchase on it, but that blade node, if I were to strike really hard targets with it, that shock would probably transfer to my hand. It's an opportunity for improvement. Perhaps, I don't know if that's where they were on historic blades or not, but I can't tell you that that's where it is on this one. And it gives me the impression it might feel a little wiggly in your hand if you're doing really hard impact cutting, which isn't something that I did here. What I did cutting-wise was cut water bottles, pool noodles, and with that, it was wonderful. It was a joy to move around. It cut through the water bottles quite well. It's a really expensive sword that is somebody else's property who would like it back in good order. So I'm kind of nervous about breaking it, chipping it. Things can happen. Even if you're cutting a pool noodle, you can miss, you can hit the ground. Fortunately, I didn't do any of that. What I did, though, is have some very good, successful water bottle cuts, pool noodle cuts, and then I put it away. I didn't do any honing, any sharpening. This is exactly the way it came to me, but it gives me the impression that it would sail through tatami mats, that it would do all of those things quite well. I cut water bottles, pool noodles, and it did all of those things quite well. I think it's an incredibly effective cutter. The only thing that I would say is it's a little on the wiggly side. It looks like a big substantial sword, but it's quite thin in terms of the overall thickness of the blade. It tapers down quite a bit. So it's not whippy exactly, but it has a little less rigidity than you might think a blade like this would. And as a result, it's quite thin and cuts quite well as well. It has a great profile for cutting. So if you wanted to use this for more aggressive cutting, Mateusz Sulowski, as I understand it, has made this blade profile a number of times. If you want to use this for cutting, I'm very confident it would be quite effective at it, at least if you're cutting tatami or like targets. All right, sword friends, you have seen close-ups of the bits and bobs, fits and features. You've seen me move it around and you've seen me cut with it, and you've heard my thoughts on those things for whatever they're worth. Hopefully at this point, you have some idea of if this sword is worth your hard-earned money or not, or if one like it is, because you probably can't buy this one. But you could probably commission one, or maybe you'll find one secondhand out in the market. And hopefully if you're encountered with those opportunities, you have some idea if it's worth your money or not. But it's time for me to answer the question myself. Do I personally think it's worth $3,000? And the short answer here is yes. I actually think it's a pretty solid value for $3,000. What you get here is a sword that's made competently by a guy who knows how to make swords. You can pick it up in your hand and feel that somebody who knew what they were doing made the sword. Now, I questioned where the blade nodes were located. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert on here, and it also is not so bad that I feel like it's going to shake itself out of my hand. Just creates a little bit different feeling in hard use than I might like, though I don't know that this blade and its profile is necessarily geared towards, armored combat or super hard fighting or destined for the croquet stake of doom kind of combat. So for what it is, I think it feels very competently made. It feels like it had a design and an intent behind it. It has inspirations behind it, which I can see. It has a story. It has a custom maker who's developed a very strong capability with his craft and has executed it well in this blade. You also get like a beautiful scabbard with competent leather work done in a package that overall feels like it's made of quality parts. And you're paying a premium price for it, but I feel like you're getting a premium product out the other end. Now, I've made some critiques, I guess, about the visual side of things. If I were to commission a sword, I would probably choose other options. But if this were to land in my collection for $3,000, I would not say it is not worth it. It seems like overall a pretty solid value, and the level of detail and craftsmanship that I see here is just very, very top notch. So there are seldom products that you spend $3,000 on and feel like you got a deal, but this might actually be one of them. He's done an excellent job on this sword, and it's checked all the boxes for me in the sense that, like, in every aspect I can see craftsmanship and quality and intent and design, and I can also pick it up and feel like somebody who knew what they were doing used it, and it's sharpened well. The bevels are good. The terminations on some of the little nuances, things that people otherwise overlook, are adhered to, and you pick it up and hold it and it just makes you smile. And all of those things combined, even for $3,000, would make me say yes. This is a very fun sword. I feel very fortunate to have spent the time with it I have. So special thanks again to Sword Friend Andrew for lending this. It's been fun. It's going to come back to you in good shape. That's all I've got for Sword Friends. Cheers, and thanks for watching.